Whakalawala atu Nissan Bolivinaka Malolele Kia ora. Welcome to Tutala Mai, our people, your stories. Crime impacts us all, and in the past year we've seen a surge in gun violence linked to gang activity. In Otara alone, media reported gangs connected to 5 shootings that took place over 2 days last year. Gang turf wars and organised crime have seen more than 350 people with firearm injuries across Auckland. Many of us will know someone in a gang or an informal group from a local area, all the way up to a fully fledged criminal organisation. But what's behind the surge in gang violence, and why are our young people still attracted to the gang life? To discuss that, today, joined with me in the studio, we have Otara-based community worker Sully Paea, and also Massey University Associate Professor, Dr. Julia Ioane. Malole soifua, and welcome both to Tutala Mai.
Malole soifua.
Thank you. Sully, I want to come to you first, and I know that your background is that you were a former member of Otara's first gang in the 1970s, the Stormtroopers. And so as a young Pasifika man, the time that you joined, can you share a little bit about what attracted you to that?
I was fresh from the islands off the banana boat, looking for fun, adventure, and go back a little bit. My journey in life didn't start off very well. I grew up in an environment where lots of violence and abuse, and so it didn't start off very good for me. So when I came from the islands to Auckland, landed in Otahu, and that's where it began. I got into the crowd where I thought that that was the place to be, and that is, lots of alcohol, lots of drinking, and that began my journey during that era, which leads up to me connecting up with the gang. And pretty much my journey, I was looking for somewhere to belong, somewhere where I can be accepted, and somewhere where I can feel a part of. And I think that's what attracted me to the gangs, because you got people there that are on the same journey with me, so we just kind of connect up, and that's where I found what I thought at the time was what I was looking for, and that was what I ended up doing, and that is connect up with the gangs.
Those reasons, though, that you mentioned, do you believe that those are some of why our young people are still wanting to join those gangs now?
That's one of the reasons, is that the big issue for me through the years I learned is that we're looking for identity. We're looking for ourselves. Who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? And looking for that purpose. And for us Pacific youth in particular, is that, we come from, born in the islands, came with a culture, and came here connected up with a completely different culture. And so in the midst of all that, we're trying to find ourselves. And for many, don't seem to find it. I was one of them. I thought I found it, but I ended up in a bad place, the wrong place.
Dr. Julia, I want to come to you now. You are an associate professor for Massey University, and you've done a lot of firsts in regards to your background with academia. You're one of the first Pacific people to develop a demographic profile of Pacific young people in the justice system. And obviously, again, our young people are prone, right, especially our Pacifica children, to that gang life. Simple, same question again would really be, why do young people go into crime and into gangs?
Look, it's a really good question, and we can go on,
Yeah,
for a while talking about that. But the why really, if you look at our young people, our Pacifica young people who have engaged in gangs, they themselves have either been exposed to violence, okay, whether it be family violence. I can completely agree with Sully's story, or they've actually engaged in the violent behaviour themselves. If we look at our Pacifica youth who are coming through the justice sector, most of them, the large majority of them, will be there because of violent offending. That's been going on for years. That's even a decade ago, even when I was doing the research, that was still the highest type of offending behaviour was violence, and it's still the same even now. And I think for me, it's that with the young people that I work with in my role as a psychologist, as a clinical psychologist, most of them have witnessed family violence at home, or they have not been able to communicate, to their parents. Totally agree with this whole identity, because if you think about Pacific, our worldview, the way our identity is relational. So we only do things because of our relationships with our families, our parents, our community, and so forth. And when we're raised in an environment, and I'm saying this really general, when we're raised in an environment where things at home are different to how we're meant to be at school, then that creates a conflict. And I find with a lot of the young boys that I work with, that conflict it stays within. Okay, they don't talk about the anxiety that they might be feeling. They don't even call it anxiety. They don't call it depression. Even with the guys in prison, they describe the symptoms. And I see them as a psychologist, so they describe the symptoms, and I'm like, these are symptoms of depression, these are symptoms of anxiety. But because of us as Pacifica, we don't identify it as that. But how do we show it? We show it through our aggressive behaviour. And so when they're younger, they're disconnected from family, they're disconnected from education, and then they go with like-minded peers, other peers who are like them. So I remember a young boy that I worked with a number of years ago. His gang was made up of all of them were all raised in single parent families. So for them, they connected with each other because no one else understood what they were going through. They were all raised by single mothers. That was their connection. And they all did their offending behaviour together. So hence the why is, they're looking for somewhere. They're looking for somewhere to belong. And let's face it, when you turn up to a gang pad in the middle of the night, hungry, seeking comfort, it's going to be given to you. Okay, that's the reality. And as a young child, you're going to keep going back because you find that security where ideally it needs to come from home, and it needs to come in a way where our culture has evolved. Because I find, I'm New Zealand born here, the way my parents were raised in Samoa, they tried to implement that with our parenting practices here. It's not a clear fit. It has to evolve because of the environment that we're in.
Dr. Julia, you again were talking about behaviour patterns, right? Those things that children grow up and they've probably seen violence. What do you think, though, really are the influences in a childhood or a child's childhood that would bring them to want to be like, hey, I want to join a gang?
Yeah, it's a good question. You typically what you'll see in terms of their childhood are some of them might be withdrawn in school, might not engage in much in school, but then some will show some behavioural issues. So behavioural issues as in they might not want to listen to the teacher, they might not want to listen to their parents, they throw tantrums and so forth. And what we need to realise is that when a child acts out, it's usually because they don't have the words to articulate or to be able to say what's going on with them. They're not able to describe the feelings that's going on for them. And I see that a lot with our Pacifica youth that are coming in. They don't know what sadness is. They don't know what, feeling anxious is, but they definitely know what angry is, what it means to be angry and feeling that they have to push away the anger. But the anger is just an emotion. It's just how do you behave, when you're angry. And if they see the violence within the home, that can, they learn. It's not rocket science stuff. It's stuff that we all know. You see something, you do it. And you learn from it. As they get older, they begin to disengage from, school. I'd say all of the young people that I've worked with in the justice sector, they're not at school. Or if they are in education, it's an alternate education, not a mainstream. So they won't be at school. They don't listen to parents. Okay, so they might be living at home, and this is where it goes against all our values as Pacific, not listening to our parents, to their parents, not going to church. So it's that real removing of themselves and going out whenever they want to go out.
Of course. Sully, again, you were part of, this was your childhood growing up here in Aotearoa, coming from an island to new environments, and we talk a lot about environments that calm creates calm, chaos creates chaos. What is it from your childhood that you saw just was like, this is the reason why I went and joined a gang, or you felt the need to I suppose, stormtroopers? What did stormtroopers give you that you did not get at home?
Well, firstly, I grew up in an environment where there was violence, there was alcohol was involved all the time. I see it firsthand. I see it all the time. So it left that anger in me, and anger that I didn't know how to get rid of. When I was here in Otara, it continued. That is still there. How I grew up with the abuse, the physical, what I went through anyway as a child, that affected me quite a long time, right through my early young teenage years. And yeah, it's acting out what I knew. That's the only way I knew. Drinking, fights, gangs. That was the life. That was all I knew. And felt like I was stuck in an environment where I don't know how to get out of. And the drinking, it becomes the only thing that I can get some peace and so I kept drinking until I become an alcoholic, and that led me more into trouble. So living in that environment, and as you grow older, you continue to do that. You continue to act out on that, and I think the gang helps to escalate that even more. So, but I think somewhere in there, I knew that this is not right. There's a button in me that is the right and the wrongs. Maybe something that I've learned way back when I was a child as well, that there is the rights and the wrongs. So I knew that being in that environment is not going to get me in the right place. It's not going to get me anywhere. And so I think that's beginning the change in my direction.
While you were in the Stormtroopers, did you obviously have a lot of association then with the crimes that you may have committed? And how was the police back then? How was the response that they gave? Did you end up going to prison? Did you have to serve time at any point?
Well, I was fortunate that I didn't, of all the stuff that I've done, I didn't get caught up, end up in the justice system. But there are others around me that was worse, in a worse off position. But I was able to recognize and pull back from there and decided to choose a different direction. And but yeah, it's very difficult environment to leave, to come away from there, because you're stuck in that cycle of drugs and alcohol, violence, that lifestyle.
Gang life, Dr. Julia, and what you've seen over the years, we probably all come from a similar generation of seeing, the beheading that happened in Otara, right, between the Crips and all that of the Tongan gang. The mental health issues, though, out of that, right, of what those children would have grown up with, or what you've seen of the doctorate that you read, you say here that at least 61% were exposed to family violence. Again, what are the stats now at the moment of what we're seeing in regards to those children who have experienced family violence? And they've equated that to be like, I don't want that, I'm just going to go and join a gang, because they probably show a little bit more love than what I'm seeing at home. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, look, what tends to happen, if I think about that research, and it was across Pacifica, Pakeha and Māori, and all of those three groups, all the young people in those three ethnic groups, more than 50% had been exposed to family violence. So family violence, it doesn't have a face, it doesn't have a colour. It goes across all our different, ethnicities. But I think with our Pacific young people, as they pick it up and, not being able to communicate, they externalise it. Boys, they scrap it out. They have these fights at school, and often I remember one young boy saying he fought at school and he played up at school because he couldn't do it at home. He couldn't talk about it at home, what was going on, and at school they're not allowed to hit you, and so forth. So hence, there is that reason around the whole family violence. But it's a trauma, and I don't think that that's something that we need to educate ourselves on more. This is, what is the impact on the brain? What is the impact on the development of a young person? Because like anything, if a child is not growing up in the right environment, you have to change the environment. So this can be parents, and often where I've seen the change is when parents have made the change. Like it could be an economic change where one mother's decided to, look, I'll stay home, and it might this is where economic and poverty issues come into it. You know, it might be that I'll stay home for 6 months and I'll be home when the kids get home. You know, so that can be a solution. Often mum and dad realizing the way we talk to each other is not respectful. You know, so when they've made those changes, then often in the research that I'm doing at the moment, that's where there's been a change in the young person. They don't attribute it to a psychologist working with them or, you know, or any of the, you know, other stuff that's been going on for them. It's the fact that the change has happened at home, you know, and then things like employment. You know, if they found a good job where they can support their parents and their family, those are the things. But it's the trauma that's really important, the impact of substance abuse, okay, on that, which can lead to things like psychosis, you know, if not treated and if not managed appropriately within the health system.
Sully, you've been attributed to or credited for a whole generation of our youth in Otara from not joining gangs, right? And you've had that youth program that is very well known, which is Paea, and has probably saved a lot of our kids. What's changed and why now are we still seeing those generations of young people in Otara who still want to join gangs? You know, what opportunities do our Pacifica youth need access to in order for them to choose a different pathway from joining gangs?
What we did way back in when we began in '94 is that I wanted to do something that I want someone to do to me when I was growing up. I want someone there, but they weren't there. So I decided that I want to do that and step into and be that person. And through the years, many young people had come to me and said, "Thank you for being there, just being there, walking with them." And so when we first started, that's basically what we did. We went out there and connect on the street. We're not stuck in the office ticking boxes and writing reports. And no, we were on the street. We connect with youth and families. We have lots of sizzles out on the street. And that way we can understand the language of the street. That way we can pick up what are the issues of the street in our families. And that was what we did. Pretty much, we connect with unconnected generation, the children that had been come from family violence. I can pick up Johnny, his language, his mannerism, and we know exactly where he's been. And he's acting out on the street, the things that he has learned from home, the things happening inside. So that gives us an opportunity to connect with this young person and journey with them and connect with them. And we're there. So that's pretty much what we did. Listen to their stories, and when they go through pain, we're there. We understand. I mean, I understand because that's where I've been. And so I'm able to say, hey, how about try this direction? And we can all journey together. And through the years, as I look back and there are some success stories in this room. And I had looked back and how many young people that had come back to me and said, "You're always there. Thank you for being there." And journeying with them, walk with them, listen to their pain and their the good things and the bad things that happen in their lives. We're always there. I think that's really where our success is that we connect with our children, we connect with our youth, we connect with our family, so they're not suffering alone. So,
Dr. Julia, what Sully has just said in regards to doing the groundwork, right? He sees it every day. Then where can you maybe see the disconnection between what government should do or what the police should do? Can you maybe share how are we to work together and intervene a lot more sooner than later for our kids?
It's a good question, and I feel like it's beginning, the wheels are turning for that. You know, it's really, we have to focus on the community. We have to really genuinely engage with our families and with the community, because who's going to know best what's going on and who's going to know best what needs to happen is our community. So, you know, with police, the police have a Pacific national strategy, Toia Fō, which is first ever having a strategy, you know, for Pacific, and that was done in consultation and writing together with the Pacific community. Took a while to do that, okay, because you can imagine how much of the relationship, the va, that had to be acknowledged during that time. But we got there in the end. And I think that's the crucial part, is it has to be a community-focused approach. We all talk about this, it's been going on for ages, but what do we mean by community? We mean by actually going into these homes, going into talking to our parents, talking to our young people, giving them a space to be able to talk about things. Because what we have to remember is that the most developmentally appropriate time to take risks and really push boundaries is when you're a teenager. We all expect that. I'm sure all of us have all pushed boundaries when we were young people. It's just trying to figure out which is what's to be expected and which is going to actually become more serious where they continue to engage in offending behaviour. And typically when you're involved in gangs, there's a sense of loyalty. That's the reality. And I see that with some of the men in prison when we've had our talanoa, is there's a huge sense of loyalty, not only with their family, but also to the gangs, and because they also provide for their families. So how do we stop that from happening? The only way we can do that is to replace it with something that's going to be equally rewarding.
This is what we're saying though, right? We see the little gangs, the boys who just want to hang around, and all of a sudden they say, we're a gang. But then we have organized, real criminal, organized, they're like a business, right? And they are filtering themselves through the community. I know firsthand, I've seen it, right? People who are wanting to just casually befriend your children because they want to say, we will look after your children. What do you see though on the ground though, Sully? Those things happening, how have you been able to, get out there and say, no, don't do that, young man, that that's not the place to be?
I see it all the time. And I'd like to think that my presence being there will help to disrupt some of their activities, because, they know where I stand and they know what I speak for and what I stand for. And particularly when I target their children, I can connect up with their children. And because a lot of as bad as they are, everybody, when they have kids, they want their kids to do well. And so I connect up with their kids and to be able to do something positive. And so my way of doing things is just basically just to be there and to be their conscience that what they're doing is wrong. And lots of times, that's what I hear is that they don't want to do what they do, but because sometimes they're pushed into that position where they don't have a job, they don't have any qualification, education is zero, so that's the only thing that they can do. So my being there will help them to disrupt some of their negative activities here.
Sully, what would be, I suppose, your key messaging though to a young person that will watch this, or to the families and even the parents that even Dr. Julia spoke about, right? If we get to the parents, then we'll get to the kids. What would be though your key messaging on preventing?
Well, I think sometimes, especially, it's hard when the parents are the instigators. The kids are good, but sometimes the parents are the ones that are instigating it. That push their kids to that point where they. So again, I also there to connect with the parents. An example is I've worked on the street for a very long time, and now I'm seeing second, third generations that are coming through. So that gives me the opportunity to connect with more in a positive way, and because I see the damage that is done. And I'm able to say, hey, look, if you don't do this, this is going to happen. To give them some direction and help them to how to journey through their difficulties. So, that's the sad thing I see, is that sometimes the kids are really good kids who really want to do well, who wants to, but because of the environment that they grow up in, if they do well where we are, but when they go home to a not very good environment. So it makes it really difficult. But that gives us the opportunity to connect more with the parents. So.
Finally, Dr. Julia, can I just ask, There was a police the police launched a nationwide operation called Operation Tofiro that was about preventing the firearms-related violence, but by disrupting the illegal supply of firearms to gangs and organized crime groups. How do you think, though, that the police can contribute with the work that you're doing, that you've researched and you've talked about, how kids see family violence, but gun violence? How do we lessen that in our community?
I think my first comment would be that it's not just a role for police. It's a responsibility that we all must hold that tapa cloth for our communities and for our people. I think one of the things really is we've got to get in there early, right from the beginning, understanding the importance of those first 1,000 days of a baby, and that's from the moment that the mum conceives right up until they're 2 years of age, understanding just how important it is for the mother to have real positive physical, emotional, mental health support, during that time, because that's the time when baby's developing, and if we get it right, that foundation, if we get that foundation right, that's going to help in terms of their development. So that first 1,000 days is crucial. And I remember these are things that we used to do back in the islands. We used to have these, mothers getting together, looking after the mother-to-be, or, the mother who had just had a child, and working with her, trying to make her as stressless as possible, and bringing in those interventions that we used to use back home and evolving it so that it fits here, in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Because our Pacifica youth, I'm finding it more and more rare to find a young person who's fully Samoan. What does it mean for Pacific? Right. We all go on about cultural competence, but we also got to address cultural safety. And this is about understanding for all of us, what are our biases? What are the biases that we have? I remember when I first started, I used to think, we don't need a safety plan for when they go to church because they're not going to offend in church. But actually the reality is they will offend, regardless, of where they go. So I think it's very much a community-based approach. It has to be whānau. There's no way that you can work with a young person without working with their parents. And I agree, often the parents will be the trigger, but then usually there are some fundamental key triggers that are going on for the parents that have to be identified. And sorry, just one more thing. Within the justice sector, what I see with our Pacific is a lot of our families, when their young person is involved in youth court, it's just the parents supporting them. They haven't told the wider family. They haven't told the church. And I say this with respect to our Pacific community as well as to our churches. We need to stop that air of judgment. The judgment that goes on, because we don't ask what offence they've engaged in. We've asked where they're from, who are their parents, and then we start connecting the dots. Oh, that's the child of so and so. Oh, yeah, that's why they're like that, and that doesn't help our children and our young people. And if they start hearing that story, then how does that make them see themselves? And they go to a gang place where they are going to be accepted. It's not rocket science.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today on Tutala Mai. I really appreciate Sully, Paea, and also Associate Professor Dr. Julia Ioane. Malo.
Thank you.
And that's it for our edition of Tutala Mai. Thank you for watching, and thank you to our Tutala Mai team. You can let us know what you think on our PMN News Facebook page. And that's been Tutala Mai, Our People, Your Stories.